Right, hi, I'm Matt. If it's all right with you, I'll go without the microphone. If you're struggling to hear, just make strange faces at me, wave, whatever you want. I'm Matt. I'm consultant developer at Stewart Digital. I'm a front-end web specialist, a BDD evangelist, and an argument starter. Generally, this list kind of changes depending on what things I'm fascinated by at one time. But one thing that goes throughout all of my passions in these terms is software craftsmanship. Software craftsmanship is really important. It gives us high quality. It means that all of our work is professional. It's robust. It's usable. Real users can really benefit from what we do. And it's long-term minded. So software craftsmanship is one of those things that it's hard to put your finger on what good code's like. Sometimes it's easier to put your finger on what bad code's like. So hopefully we're going to go through some examples of how our code can be better. And we'll go through that together. If you've got any questions, feel free to just stick your hand up and I'll try and get to you. A little quote I like. You spend a lot more time and money maintaining a site than building it. One reason why I like it is because I said it. I quote myself on this a lot because it comes up a lot. Because lots of the time, junior developers want to just rush things out. Project managers just want the product live. And they don't think about the long term. What happens then, as you've probably experienced, is that you kind of rush through the project and it works on day one. But by 3 weeks in, you've got so many issues that you're pretty much having to take the site down again and start again. So software craftsmanship gives you a long-term view. What I'd like you to do is just turn to your neighbor, maybe group of three, whatever you're comfortable with. I'd like you to introduce yourself very briefly. Your name, your job title, and why you're here this evening. You've got 30 seconds, 30 seconds. Okay, let's come back together. The good thing is there are some rooms of programmers that it's really hard to get speaking to each other. I'm really glad that you're comfortable speaking to each other because that's going to come in handy later. Because what we're going to end up doing is we're going to look at a bit of this and then we're going to have a chance to discuss with the person next to you, the little group that you just formed, about how you could use this. There's no point me talking about how I use this in abstract terms and ignoring how you can use it. So let's just start right at the beginning. Automated tests. Automated tests can be scary, but they're really important. They create a safety net for you. Ultimately, you get quick feedback when you're using them that gives you the confidence to move forward, to refactor, to change the way your code works, still meeting the same requirements. But they also serve as great documentation. If you look through the code, you can tell kind of what it does and how it does it. You don't always get a sense of what it should be doing. The test should be a great way of saying what it should be doing, and if they pass, it's a great evidence that you've done what you should have done. There are certain types of testing. The main one we're going to be focusing on today is unit testing. We're going to touch a little bit on integration testing. These are the things that JasmineQuery is great for. The things that it's not really for, exploratory testing. You're not going to use it to click around your site and see whether it feels right as a user. It's not a performance test framework. We're hoping that all of these tests, when I do on-site work with clients, I want these tests to run absolute maximum 1 second for the site. I've currently got 125 tests for my current client. That runs in 0.1 seconds. So we're not doing performance testing, we're not doing heavy lifting. We're not doing cross-browser testing. We're not doing user experience testing. We're not doing business acceptance testing. These are all things that would come along if you're doing a bigger project, and they'll be really helpful tools to make sure you're doing your job well. But they're not what we're talking about today. We're focusing on unit testing and integration testing. One thing that's key to all of this, unit testing talks about a unit. You've got to know what your unit is. So I'd like to just talk very briefly about separation of concerns. Now all of this is applied to jQuery. I'm only looking at jQuery. So in jQuery, you've got the opportunity to break your code down into widgets. Now I do interviews for my current client, and it's amazing how many people don't know how to write a jQuery widget. They're very happy to use, I don't know, a.hide, but they don't know how to make their own function that sits alongside hide. That's the first thing you want to do. I'm going to dig briefly into it, but it's not what I'm going to focus on. If you're using jQuery, learn to use widgets. Learn how powerful they can be. One really important thing about separation of concerns is that you need to learn to trust other libraries. If you're using, let's say, an event library, you're not testing that when the user does this, that event fires. You're trusting that that will happen as you expect. And because of that, we're creating fake data a lot of the time. We're creating this fake scenario that tests just our one little thing that we're concerned with. So we don't expect particular things to exist. So what do I mean by that? I might mean users in the database. I might mean servers. I don't want to make real HTTP calls and find that a server's down and my tests have failed. We don't test messages. Now, I was trying to think of the right word for it. I couldn't think of a good one word, so I stuck with messages. What I mean by that is kind of details passed around the application, different state, things that could be happening. If it's on Facebook, you don't want to test that I've got 3 friends, because I might have 4 friends tomorrow and all the tests might break. We're talking about breaking it down to one very small unit, which is what your thing does. So with my example of hide, hide is a widget. What's it do? It hides things. It also fades things out if you give it an amount of time. So that's one thing, that's kind of one unit. You don't test why it hides, what happens after it hides, other than that it behaves correctly. So very, very briefly, how to write a basic widget. The sort of code that I see all the time in code bases is like this. I've got this one specific element, and on that one element, I want all of this stuff to happen. My example here is it's going to open a new window and prevent the default behavior, so it's kind of externalizing links. So why not give it a name? Why not say open in new window? Have the same function behavior in there, and then later on decide that you're going to use that on hyperlinks with a class of external link. That means that you've got the power later to use that on other things. But you've also, as we'll see in a minute, got the power to test that in isolation without having a page set up, which is actually a really powerful thing. Before we get too far in, I think it's important just to look at the terms that we're going to be using. A lot of these are going to be familiar, some of them might not be. So let's just go right from the beginning. Everything we're talking about today is in the browser. Everything we're talking about is in JavaScript, and most of it is going to be in the DOM. Document Object Model, it's the way that we interact with the page. Now, what we care about is the bits of jQuery that fit inside the DOM. Now, particularly, the widgets that I've just talked about fit inside jQuery. So when we talk about a widget, we're talking about all of this context, the browser, the JavaScript, the DOM, the jQuery. Jasmine. Jasmine is the test framework for JavaScript. It makes all of this really simple. But it's not got any specific knowledge about jQuery. So when I started using Jasmine, it was great for little standalone things, but it wasn't so good when I started playing with jQuery. And that's where JasmineQuery comes in. JasmineQuery is one thing. It's your bridge between Jasmine and jQuery. There is a library called JasmineQuery. You can have a look at it afterwards. You can see if you prefer it to this one. I've gone with a slightly different approach because I thought it was good. I still think it's good. If anyone wants to collaborate on anything, I'm all happy to. If anyone knows who runs JasmineQuery and wants to have a conversation, I'm all happy to. But what I'm going to show you today is what I've created and why I've created it. First of all, it sits inside a framework, Jasmine. Jasmine's not my thing. It's nice and pretty. It's really, really simple when you look at it. I've created a demo. It should exist. It should have access to jQuery. So one of the really cool things there, those tests are readable. The things that make them readable, they're grouped by feature. They're easy to understand. And Jasmine adds an amazing power in what they call spies and mocks. And we're going to look at that in the kind of part 2 of this session. So when I say it's grouped by feature and easy to understand, that comes in 2 different levels. One of them is the output that you see. First thing I do when I've finished a piece of work is show my project manager this. It's the test output. It should explain to them exactly what I've built. And if they look through that and they don't recognize what they've asked for, I've done it wrong. The other thing is the production code. Sorry, the test code. The test code here mimics this exactly. It should exist. And then we look at how we tested it exists. In this example, we're just looking at pure JavaScript stuff, so expect demo to be defined. That's how we know it exists. Expect the pretty name to be demo. Expect the length of features, so the number of features to be greater than 1. This is what Jasmine gives us. What I've aimed to do is apply this same simplicity to jQuery testing as well. We're going to look at full test coverage. I tell companies they really need to have full test coverage. And what I mean by that is that everything that matters is tested. If you want it to still work in a week's time, it should be tested. Every scenario the user can get themselves into, every behavior, every integration. Now, ultimately, each interaction. Sorry, walking too far away. When you have full test coverage, you know that green tests mean that your application's ready to go live. But also, you know that red tests mean that it's broken. You have a full confidence in this. So one question, what about production bugs? Who here aims for full test coverage? Hands up. A few? Good, good. What do you do with production bugs? Do they ever happen? Yeah? Why? Because something I didn't plan for, a user's managed to do something I didn't plan for. And the answer to that, great, that's a new feature. Let's put that into the tests and let's build it. Let's make sure that next time the tests go red if that happens. One of the core things behind JasmineQuery is that testing should be effortless. So I'd like to just tell you a brief story about life before JasmineQuery. I want to work on one feature. I was working for a big company. They had a bit of a mess and they wanted it fixed. So I said, well, the thing that's going to fix your mess is unit tests. So I went through and started writing unit tests. I basically spent 3 days in a dark room writing unit tests for one simple thing. I looked at it and thought, testing should be effortless. And I looked at the amount of code I'd written just to get around what jQuery does and how it works. And I realized that actually what I've done there is the basis of JasmineQuery. So, what's the future for JasmineQuery? I don't know. You might know better than I do. What do you want tested that's not currently effortless? This is a GitHub project. You can go on there. You can raise issues. If you're trying to test something and you find that it's really hard work, you can start a conversation about it. So, I'd like to just start off right at the beginning with matches. We looked at matches at on the Jasmine example. We can expect something to be something. We can expect something to be greater than. But there's no Jasmine way of saying, expect my widget to have class loading. So, is that important? Yeah, of course it's important. So what we've done, JasmineQuery, expect my widget to have class loading. The idea is it should read just like you'd say it if you weren't writing a unit test. At that point, the test's going to go green if it has the class, red if it doesn't. Same thing with a sign-up form. We're going to expect a sign-up form to be injected into our widget. So, expect my widget to contain sign-up form. It should be easy to read, easy to write. One other one, expect my widget to be visible. Did you guess it? Expect my widget to be visible. Oh, sorry, there is one more, I cheated. Expect widget HTML to equal. Every so often, we're given some HTML, we need to make sure we pass it on properly. So great. Expect my widget HTML to equal. If I only gave you the second bullet points of each of these, would you feel like you missed the first one? No, you've got everything there. Your tests, your test code should read like a description of what's happening. But there's one really important thing here. Okay? I can't plan ahead for everything you're going to need. So one thing that I've built as the core of JasmineQuery is an easy way to create your own matches. I've then used that easy way to create some that you might find helpful. If you create some that you think other people might find helpful, share it. Raise me a pull request. It's all good. Now, in terms of actual JavaScript to create one, this is what we're looking at. JasmineQuery, add matcher. You give a name of your matcher. So it might be, I don't know, to have class was my first example. And then you give it a function. And you're returning a condition. So you're returning true if it passed and false if it doesn't. So you're going to use jQuery's .hasClass and give it the class. So that's a really easy way of doing that. And when you come to use it, expect my widget dot and then whatever you called it. So hopefully, if your application is really specific and you've got some really special thing that you're testing for, this gives you the ability to do it really easily. Now, one of the things that I've done here, when you use this, it always expects my widget to be a jQuery widget, a jQuery element, sorry. If it's not a jQuery element, it goes wrong. It throws an exception. It comes up with a red test. Now, if you were trying to do this without JasmineQuery, you'd be having to do all that yourself in every matcher that starts to use this. So I'd like you to turn back to that group that you were with and discuss this very briefly. Ah, sorry, I went too fast. Is it going to happen? There we go. JasmineQuery allows you to set up your own matchers. What do you want to test for? So think about the thing you're working on at the moment, and I want you to fill in the blanks. Maybe just one example each. Expect something to something. Okay, complete the sentence. Go. You've got 2 minutes. Okay, let's come back together. Let's bring it back. So what sort of things came up? What did you start discussing? Because it'd be really interesting to see if we're talking about the same thing as each other. So is anyone happy to give the first example? Extra free slice of pizza for that person. No?
Expect the button to be disabled.
Expect the button to be?
Disabled.
Disabled. There we go. So how would you build that? In jQuery, we've got the is, and we can do :disabled. Or maybe in your application, you've got a class of disabled as well. So it needs to be :disabled and it needs to be class of disabled. So in your application, that might have some really special meaning that I can't plan for. So you've got a syntax to do that. Thanks. Free slice of pizza. Anyone else?
Expect a drop down to contain a certain value.
Absolutely. Expect a drop down to contain a value. Now, that one, I think people could benefit from that in general. If you're sitting there and you're going, what? Matt hasn't thought of this. What an idiot. Raise me a pull request. Now that I go home, I might try and do that. So the idea is that you've got some scenarios that are going to come up that I might not have thought of. They might be really specialist or they might be really general. But I don't want to limit what you're doing. I want to empower you. So, going to completely change away from matchers. Matchers are our way of making sure that something's the way that we'd expect. Mocking is a way of making sure that things are. Making sure we set things up in a way that we expect them to be. Now, when you think of mocking, you might have something completely different come into your head. This isn't the sort of mocking we're talking about. Mocking is all about pretending that something's happened, or pretending that some other service is doing some other thing. So in our case, we're looking at jQuery events. So the sort of thing we might be mocking, document ready. Is it important that your application does certain things after document ready? If you've ever used jQuery, the answer is probably yes. If you do it before document ready, it's likely to have no effect in a lot of cases. So it's really important to go, right, before I do document ready, expect nothing to have happened. Now that I do document ready, expect something to have happened. So having that power is really useful. Other things, button clicks. You expect a user to click something disabled and nothing to have happened. And then to click something when it's not disabled and something to have happened. Form submits. What about a window resize? These last two are probably my favorite example of why I just went mad and wrote JasmineQuery. Because the first ones you can kind of get away with doing it. You can kind of do the click events, whatever. Let's start at the bottom, window resize. Are you really going to get your test, your unit test that's meant to run in a fraction of a second and resize the window quickly before it runs the next test? You're not going to do it. So actually, let's take it completely out of the context of what the browser's really doing. Remember I talked about separation of concern? Who cares about why the browser's resizing? That the user clicks here and they do this. All that you care about is the browser's telling you it's resizing and you need to respond to it. Therefore, what JasmineQuery does is it allows you to pretend the browser's resizing. You feed through your own data, you do all of that stuff. Form submits. The Friday, I wrote JasmineQuery over a weekend because I'd just gone that mad. And the Friday was the final straw. I was working with a team. I broke a test. Is that a bad thing? No. It's not bad to break a test. It means that you're playing with it. It's bad to ignore a broken test. It's bad to go live with a broken test. But to break a test, realize what's wrong and fix it? Well, that's great. That's what your tests are there for. So I broke a test, but I couldn't see the broken test. Now, Jasmine runs in a browser. This developer had created a form with an action and a submit button, and they clicked that submit button. I'd broken the event handler for that submit. I hadn't realized, but all of a sudden, I ended up on some other page having submitted some data and trying to work out how I got there. And I couldn't ever see the failing test. So what I've done with these is I've gone and re-engineered jQuery's event model. When you use JasmineQuery in the way that I'll show you in a minute, you don't touch any jQuery events. You say document ready, you're telling JasmineQuery to pretend that the document's ready. You're not telling jQuery that the document is ready. Now that might seem like a pedantic difference, but when you get to the thing of a form submitting, it makes a real difference. So we'll look at how that's going to work in a minute. So the standard ways in jQuery that you might want to trigger some events. You've got the .click, or the slightly nicer .trigger click. You've got a form submit, and also trigger submit, bind, and whatever else you've got, and you can pass data through. As long as you tell JasmineQuery to mock events like this, none of those things are going to actually hit jQuery. Now, one topic that I'm going to dip in and out of, but it's probably my favorite topic to let my mind unravel over. How do you test a testing framework? That was the big obstacle before I actually sat down and wrote this stuff, because I don't want to invest a load of time in testing this when it's there to do tests. The way that I test this, the way that I can tell you confidently that it's reliable, I've got a suite of tests. I don't know how many, maybe 40, 50. They run once with jQuery in place, and once with my mock of jQuery in place. And if the answers are different, then it fails. So I can tell you with complete confidence that the things that I've tested in here will be exactly the same as jQuery. What I can't tell you, just like we said at the beginning, I'm not doing exploratory testing. I'm not trying to find things that are broken with unit tests. So it might be there's some case I haven't found. So you can raise me a pull request with an example of a broken test, and I'll fix it. You can fix it yourself. So the most important question to ask, just like a toddler, why? So we've gone through why you might not want to use jQuery's default events. But also, what about when you want to detect the behavior of event handlers? What if you want to prevent a default action of a click? So my first example, you're popping up a window. You don't want this window to move on to the other page as well. Well, great. Expect link to prevent default for click. So that's a JasmineQuery matcher that you've got available when you're using the events. Expect it not to have a handler for submit. I don't want to listen into that submit. I just want it to go straight through uninterrupted. So those are the things that you can do with JasmineQuery. You can test your handlers with absolutely no side effects. Cool? The next one, spying. Spying on widgets. Not necessarily like that. When you're testing something in isolation and you want to know, actually, I want this to have used, I don't know, fade out. You don't want to test the behavior of fade out, but you do want to test that fade out has been used. So you can spy on fade out, and you can make sure that you've used it, maybe with some properties as well. Has it been set up correctly? Have you used it with the right parameters? So a really brief how. How do you spy on the widget you want to use? Simple. JasmineQuery, spy on widget. The widget I'm going to spy on is hide. Now, this is where it was really difficult before JasmineQuery. Expect my widget to have used widget hide. Okay? First time I ever wrote this sort of thing, I was looking at $.function.hide. Now that's called anytime you hide any element. And it got really awkward. And all my tests got bigger and bigger trying to work out which element was hidden. So this is now really simple. If you hide something that's not the myWidget DOM element, it's not gonna match. It's gonna go red. Why? We don't want to test multiple units at once. We want to trust third parties, and we want to test our little bit in isolation. So I'm not testing jQuery's fade out and making sure that it really does fade out over exactly 300 milliseconds. I just want to tell it to fade out and trust that it's going to do it. But on the other hand, we do want to test integrations with other units. I do want to make sure I'm using fade out and that I'm using it properly. Now, if you've got two different parts of your application and you're passing things between them, you want to make sure that one receives it well and the other submits it well. But you don't necessarily want to mix the tests together. So actually, some of this is a great way of doing that. If you've divided your code base into widgets, spying on widgets lets you really define the edges of what you're testing. So this one, you might want to, I kind of went into this, you might want to fade it out over 500 milliseconds. And the way of doing that is you spy on fade out, make sure that mock events is running, otherwise you might have some side effect. You then click whatever thing you want to fade out and expect it to have used widget fade out. Now this is the first time in this presentation that I'm showing you something that really could exist in a code base. This is a 4-line test that tests a real behavior that a real project manager could ask for on a real website for real users. So that's pretty much where I'm going to stop digging deeper into JasmineQuery. In a minute, we're going to ask questions, but I'd just like to go through one really important thing. I started off with software craftsmanship. JasmineQuery is a part of the reason for JasmineQuery is so that I can help people with software craftsmanship. When I say that they should write unit tests and they go, but I can't, it's hard, I've tried to make it easy. So now that you've got the tools, let's use them properly. So we talked about isolated testing. We're only going to test the widget we're working on at the moment. To do that, we're going to use widget spies. Now, one really cool thing that happens when you end up using these widgets is you can initialize a widget inside the test. To do that, you use a detached DOM. That's my terminology. It may or may not exist elsewhere. I may or may not have picked it up somewhere else. But what I mean by that, you create your elements. Did you know, a lot of people don't know this one though when they're using jQuery. Pure jQuery, if you say div in speech marks, it's a selector. If you wrap it in angle brackets, it's an element. This is going to create a new element out of nothing and apply my widget to it. Now what's the benefit of that? Why on earth would I want to do that? Why don't I just want to dump it on the page and let nature take its course? Because actually, if I do it like that, first of all, it resets between tests. Every time I start a test, I'm creating new elements. It's a really good way of defining the structure. If I'm saying that my widget's only going to work if you've got these elements inside it, well, great. I can show you exactly what elements and exactly where they need to be. It also allows you to reuse your widget. How many times have you had to put a particular ID in a particular place, a particular class on a particular element, in global scope to make sure that that widget's going to work? Or how many times has a widget interacted with something completely separate on the page that it should never have interacted with? If you're testing with a detached DOM, you're never going to have that problem. So, readable tests. We talked about that at the beginning. We want the code to be readable, the output to be readable, the examples to be clear-cut. When I say it should behave like this, it should be really easy to understand what situation I'm talking about. The descriptions should be meaningful. Jasmine's got a great, rich way of letting you say that. Okay, spell checks jumped in. Clear examples for other devs, developers. Debs. I don't want my wife to catch me talking about debs. So, readable tests. Every pass means it's working. Gives us a thing called fearless refactoring. If we want to change the structure of the code without changing the behavior, we know with confidence we can do that. It helps you with collaboration. Have you ever been scared of someone else going, I'll fix that bit in your code? You ever been scared of that? Well, if you know the tests are going to go red when they break it, you're not so scared anymore. Every failure means it's broken. And error messages are meaningful. So what we're going to do, it's one really important piece of advice I'm going to give you. Do try this at home. do try this at work. If you get stuck, that's where you can find me. Now, I don't know how much time we've got left.
10 minutes.
Okay. So what we're going to do is take some questions. But some people sit there and think, my question's probably stupid. No one else is probably thinking it. So I'd like you to just take 15 seconds, 20 seconds to run past the person next to you, that little group, what question you're thinking of asking, and ask them whether it's stupid or not. Okay, go. Okay, let's come back together. First of all, we got the first question, first hand up. Just before that, were there any really stupid questions that anyone's wanting to admit to? Their own question, not the person next to them. Any really stupid ones? No, okay, fine. Well, what's your question?
I'm not sure if it's stupid, but why did you pick expect thing to have rather than expect thing has, which just seems more natural?
Okay. The question is, why did I say expect thing to have rather than expect thing has? Now, ultimately, BDD, behavior-driven development, a lot of it is about linguistics. It's about explaining yourself very clearly. And that sort of question means that you've understood the reason behind this. It means you've understood that these things should be readable. Now, the reason I've done it is because there's a bit of a convention to start with to be greater than, to equal, to be defined, that kind of thing. There's a kind of convention there that I've tried to follow. Now, if you're working on your own project and you've not really got that convention, then great. Just do what reads right to you. If you're going to contribute that back to other people, then have a think about whether there's a way that you can say it that works with to. Now, I did have a debate with someone on the Jasmine, it was a Jasmine contributor. I had a debate with him about whether a function should be called one thing or another. Then someone else joined in and said, actually, no, it should be called this. And we had this bit of a debate about actually what's the best name for that. Now, if we're having those debates, then it's a good sign that we're putting important meaning into our names. So it's a good, yeah.
Was it your convention or did it come from somewhere else?
It's mainly the default matches in Jasmine tend to start with to. And therefore, I wanted mine to fit in and feel like part of it. Next question.
So if you want to test, for example, in the same test stuff that must happen on mobile and must happen on desktop, how can you do it in the same test?
So the question is, if you want to test it in one test, I'm going to say kind of in one feature, what happens on desktop and what happens on mobile, how do you do that? So my question is, in your application today, right now, how do you know whether it's desktop or mobile?
Look at the navigator part of the browser or the size of the window.
Okay, so we're talking about the size of the window or the user agent string, what the browser calls itself. So those are the things that you want to mock. So what you might want to do is say that the size of the window, you can fake what the size of the window is going to be, and once you've mocked that, you can then you can then expect a particular behavior to happen. Now, one of my favorite things about these tests is testing the same thing before and after an event. So if you're, for example, changing between the desktop view and the mobile view based on the user resize in their window, then great. You test it once and you say, right, it should do this. Expect this to have happened. And then you make the window smaller and say, expect it not to have happened. And that makes it, firstly, really clear to read what the difference is between desktop and mobile, but also really clear to test. If one passes and the other fails, you know that you're doing the same thing twice. Yeah? No. So what we've got is, if you use JasmineQuery.mock events, then you can say body or document dot trigger resize, and then you can give it an object, and that object will have all the properties that you want to pretend the window would pass through on that event. So then your event handler is listening into exactly what the browser will tell it. And actually, maybe that's something that we could write a helper for. Maybe we could make it really simple to go, JasmineQuery, set the browser size to this. And it will fire the resize event, and it will set the right properties, but make it nice and easy for reuse. So I'll add that to the list of ideas. Thank you. Yes?
Can you specify what type of problems did you encounter when testing jQuery with pure Jasmine?
Absolutely. The question is, can I specify what sort of problems I came into testing jQuery with pure Jasmine? If you want to look through the source code of JasmineQuery, you'll see what areas I've invested in. The tests for JasmineQuery start off with those sort of problems. The big one is when I forgot to show you what a failed test looks like. I'm sure I can create one later if you want to come quiz me on it. A failed test in Jasmine reads just as clearly as a passing test. It says, I expected 1 to be 2. And I expected 3 to be greater than 2. And it's got this really easy to read way of passing back errors. Now what I found was when I was using jQuery and Jasmine together, all of my errors read expected false to be true. So, well, what does that mean? And so now that we've created this, it will say expected this element to have class loading. And all of a sudden I know what's broken. So that's one of them, is the semantics of the message that comes back. The more important one, in terms of actually going and creating a whole library, was the way that events work. The way that I can't tell. I spent a little while in a company, and I was trying to back up everything they were doing with tests. And what I found was I got to the point where some links you should click them and it should let you through on the normal behavior. Other ones it shouldn't. Now how do you test that? Firstly, if it lets you through, you're not on your test anymore. Secondly, if it doesn't let you through, well, how do you know anything happened? So you've got this situation you can't test, and that's where the thing came in of expect this to prevent default behavior for click. Because all of a sudden now I can actually test that. Whereas a couple of years ago when I was struggling, I just literally couldn't test it. Does that answer it? Cool. What else? Yeah.
And so one question, before you said you can mock the body resize event.
Yeah.
Can you also do it when you don't use jQuery, but Jasmine, vanilla, or?
Okay. The question is, we can mock the body resize event, those sort of things. Can you also do that when you're not using jQuery? Now, as I said at the beginning, my JasmineQuery exists for one purpose. It's to mix jQuery and Jasmine. So that's not really part of my use case, but I have done it for other clients who aren't using jQuery, all that stuff. Basically, Jasmine gives you a really good way of creating spies. In most test frameworks, you've got spies, mocks, and stubs that mean 3 different things. You've got to learn what they mean. In Jasmine, they've mixed them all together. So you can say, and the other thing that's really helpful here is let's get the right terminology. JavaScript is so flexible. So with a mix of Jasmine being flexible and having really good spies, and JavaScript being really flexible, what I've done in one example actually is a fake to scroll event by literally grabbing the function that's window.scroll and then, I can't remember, something, and then literally just calling that function and giving it an object. So all of a sudden, as long as I'm saying window.scroll is equal to this, well, I can test that because I can look up what window.scroll is equal to. Yeah? Cool. Yes?
Can you also mock Ajax requests and when it succeeds, it should behave like this, and then when it's going to like showing the message to you?
Okay. So the question is, can you mock Ajax requests? So when it succeeds, you do one thing. When it fails, you do another. The answer is yes, you can. JasmineQuery at the moment doesn't have a feature for that. Have you ever used jQuery deferred? Okay, jQuery deferred is my favorite thing to show people because it's just like, you just see it drop for people and it suddenly makes sense. And it's all how you deal with asynchronous actions. Ajax in jQuery works off the same interface as deferred. So you can actually mock that quite easily just in jQuery and Jasmine. The reason I haven't actually gone and created that is because someone whose name, like the name of the library I can't remember, has actually done a really good lower level implementation to fake the actual HTTP requests. So you say, sorry? Sinon, that's the one, Sinon. And they've done a really good job of it, and I don't want to take away from that. And so basically, if you're doing that, have a look at Sinon, and you can basically say, there's a server over here, and when it's asked for this address, it's going to 404. And then you can use JasmineQuery to test the reaction of your code when that happens. Expect to have added this class, to have this content, to, I don't know, to whatever. Yeah? Yes?
There's a quite a common failure scenario where a widget is supposed to change on its own state, for example on click, but instead it changes the state of every instance of the widget on a page. Do you have a nice way to test for it in the detached DOM scenario?
Yes. The question, if I've got it right, is a common problem with widgets is when, I'm going to put it in my own words, when they're not scoped correctly. So we're saying that when you click this link, it should, I don't know, have a class of already clicked. But when you click that link, actually all the links on the page get it. Yeah, is that the sort of scenario? So basically with the detached DOM, let's just see if I can go back to it. With the detached DOM, what you can do is set up as many elements as you want. So you know that, oh, it's not there. You know that jQuery's got append, HTML, all of those sort of functions. And basically with those, you can build together these elements that you're putting in. So what I'd do in that situation is create a detached DOM that's maybe a div with 3 links in it. I'd also have variables for each of those links. And that way, I can click one of the links and expect that one to have a class. And then expect the next one not to have that class. And the next one not to. So you can start to make sure that that doesn't interfere with other things. Now the other one, the time that I find it's most common is when people are looking up classes for things. So using a detached DOM means you've got to look inside it. So do you know about .find? So you've got like some form and you want to find an element within that form. If you're using a detached DOM, .find is your only way of drilling down into it. You can't go and look up an ID somewhere else. So you're already taking away some of the side effects. Cool. Got time for any more?
You can have one more question.
One more? Anyone brave enough? One more? Yes.
Is it possible to test the browser settings like pop-up notifications?
So the question is it possible to test browser settings like pop-up enabled, disabled? I'm going to say no, because it might be possible in some situations, but it's not really what your unit tests are for. However, if you can have a play with that browser and see what information you're given back when it blocks a pop-up, does it return false? Does it throw an exception? How does that work? And then you can, inside your test, you can set up that same scenario. So let's say it throws an exception saying, can't do that, not allowed. Then great, in your test, you set up a little function that throws, can't do that, not allowed. And you make sure that your unit, your one bit that you care about, responds correctly to that. Does that make sense? Excellent.
Thank you very much.